Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. We're going to take a look at some TouchOSC basics. These are some things you may not know about, especially if you're newer to TouchOSC. So let's dig into TouchOSC and take a look. So right now, let's look at some of the basic things in TouchOSC that you should probably know about as you're building up your template for whatever you're doing with it. So first things first, what you're looking at is I've got a desktop computer and it's a PC, and I'm going to be using the desktop version of TouchOSC. That's where I'm editing. And then I also have an old iPad. And this is like an iPad Air 3. I mean, it's pretty old, from like 2014. And so I'm also running the app version of TouchOSC on that. Now, both of these are Mark II. So you want to make sure whatever you're downloading from the Apple Store or Android, it's going to be Mark II version, because that's the newest version that came out about a year and a half ago. And since Mark II version 2 of TouchOSC came out, there have been a lot of updates. So in the last 18 months, a lot has changed. So maybe you're unfamiliar with some of these really cool changes that I think are definitely making our lives in working with TouchOSC a bit easier. So let's take a look inside the desktop editor. So this is TouchOSC Mark II, and if you've seen my videos before, you're probably familiar with a lot of this. But let's just run over a couple basics here. What do some of these buttons do? And for instance, what is this fit button? Obviously you could click it and just figure it out, but it's going to fit this template size to whatever your screen is. So it is a handy way to get around if you're zoomed in really far or really close, and then pop back out. Really super basic thing. Another one is this grid system, to show the grid or not to show the grid. Sometimes if you're not working with these grid lines, it can be easier to just have it all open, especially if you're doing some of the more visual things with TouchOSC. You may not want these dots. Now, of course, we have our play button here, which if we were to, let's put in a button real quick. And then if we hit play, now you can see this is what it looks like if it was live in your template. And then to get out of this, which can often be hidden for folks, the back button or exit button is up here in the corner, and it's this little dot. The next thing is our links, our connections. So if we click this, these connections here are from your device. Now let's talk about the connections. One of the ways that I use this is I am setting the connections from my iPad device to the desktop. I think it's easier from whatever mobile device you're using, set the connections there to your computer. And especially if you are connecting to a DAW, you want to make sure that your mobile device is connecting to the DAW, not the desktop version, especially if that is only being used for editing, which is really the only time I use the desktop is for editing. I'm not using it for live use. We'll take a look at an instance with live use, but for right now, I think with your connections, it makes more sense to set them up on your mobile device. So of course you have your MIDI session and you have a variety of different connections, up to 5, and you're just going to browse here and find your network session. And right now my iPad is connected via cable, but you could do it over Wi-Fi. And what is the bridge for? MIDI over Wi-Fi. So this is where you can set your IP address for the host computer. You just set browse, and then you can set that up. And then OSC, this is going to be the ports. We use this a lot when we're talking about Ableton and Max for Live patches. We had to set those ports. If you're unfamiliar with some of those Max for Live patches with Ableton, check out some of my older videos and you'll understand how we use these ports to work with TouchOSC. Now the bridge. You've probably seen people talking about the bridge on the Facebook group or the Discord server. You're going to have to go to Hexler's website, where TouchOSC is, and download the bridge. And again, that is for MIDI over Wi-Fi. And let's talk about some of these connections, because the host IP address would be whatever you're connecting your mobile device to. So let's say you're at a venue and you're using Ableton Live on your laptop, and then you're going to use TouchOSC to control that. So now your laptop and your mobile device are going to be connected to whatever the venue's Wi-Fi is. So that's going to change whatever your IP address is on your laptop from whatever it was at your house. So that's something that's going to change depending on venue. which is why I always recommend, if you are using this in a live situation, it's a lot safer to use it with a cable from your mobile device to your computer as opposed to using the Wi-Fi, because you just run the risk of open air connections and making sure that the Wi-Fi is going to work, making sure the ports are all set up. Sometimes there are firewall issues that can block things. You could run into a variety of problems, which you may not want to deal with, especially if you're on tour. So again, these connections are going from your device to your computer. Now here on the desktop version, we have all of these same connections, and we would have to set this up, especially this OSC, if you were using, say, a touch screen on your computer that's going to connect to your DAW. And when we're looking at these connections, like the send port and the receive port, make sure you're setting the right ones for whatever your mobile device is versus whatever your desktop is. And again, the IP address is going to be different from your laptop or your desktop to your mobile device. So those are our connections to and from the device. But what if we want to put this template on our mobile device? You're going to click here and you have the editor network. Let's turn the computer into the server. And then here on my iPad, I'm going to hit that same network connections button. And there is my desktop, and I will connect to that. And now they're connected. If I was to hit the exit button on my mobile device, on my iPad here, it's going to say to you, are you sure you want to disconnect? And yes, that's fine. And you'll see that now your template is on your device. So if you wanted to save this on your device, which of course I highly recommend saving early and often, as this is software that could definitely crash on you once in a while, especially if you're pushing it really hard. You're going to hit this tab here on the right-hand side, and then you'll see a down arrow. You hit that down arrow, and that's where you can save. And these are some of the templates that I have, but you could set yours up here, save, and then hit that check mark. And then if you needed to load yours, you just hit that up button, and you can see which ones you want to load. So those are the basics of connecting your device. Now let's take a look at some of the preferences in the desktop version. Now, the reason we're taking a look at this first is because it's easier to see here, and a lot of these configurations, these preferences and settings are going to be the same across the other devices. So first things, let's take a look at preferences. Edit here, and then preferences. Now, hopefully you've gone through this before. There's a lot of things in here, and a lot of things that will make your life easier. For example, the grid. So this grid here is default set to 20. Which is fine, except you can see that you're moving within that grid. So actually, I think it's a little bit easier to have it at 10. So I keep mine at 10. And of course, you could change it to the lines system here, or you could have it as the circles. I like the circles. And I did move the alpha down because, it was a little too strong. So putting it down around 13 has been great for me. Of course, snap to grid does just what it sounds like, and showing the ruler is on the top here. That can be useful when you're building your template. Now, the default size here is something you'll want to set to whatever your device is. If you're using a modern iPhone like the 14, that's quite a bit longer than the old ones like the iPhone 6, those will be different sizes, just like if you're using an iPad Pro, a new one, versus an old iPad Air. So you'll want to figure out whatever the dimensions are for you. I will say that having an old iPad here, there's really no reason to have a really high resolution rate. Most of these buttons, I need to make sure they're big so that I can easily tap them anyways. So there's really no use to having it 1080 by whatever. That's why I just keep it at this 860 by 640, because again, these are just simple buttons and faders. We don't need them to look perfect because this is all for, workflow for utilization. And you may have noticed that when you open a new document, and if you first downloaded TouchOSC and you added a button or a fader or whatever, it would automatically put in a message. Here is where you can turn that on for yes, you want those messages, or no, you don't. I recommend having them off because it's a lot easier to not show that, but if you want those easily, you can just add those in. Pager navigation. Let's take a look at this. So if I was to add a pager here, if I was to try and click on my other tabs, nothing works. I would have to double click in, and then you see it's not, taking me to the right one. So here I'd have to go to my pages and select which one I'm working on with this little checkbox over here. But I could hold Alt and then I could click. And that's how I could move through it. So if you want to keep this locked and you don't want to accidentally hit the different pages, this is one way to do it. Now, if we turn that off, we go to Preferences, turn off the Alt key thing. Now we can just easily select through the different parts of the pager. This is information for the scripts. So if you were to want the different font size, the wrapping, color codes, this is all pretty understandable basic stuff. The control surface. Now let's take a look at this. Now, control surface is something a little different than what you're going to think it is. So this really impacts if you are using a touch screen on your computer. So let's go ahead and add a fader. And let's add 2 here real quick. And you can see on my iPad device, we have those as well. We're going to make this one blue. All right, let's move these things out of the way here. Now, if we go to Preferences, and we change our orientation to south, and the filter, let's say we want it to invert. We click done, nothing happens. But now if we hit play on our computer, you can see it's inverted everything. Our colors are inverted, and north are inverted. So you can see everything is a little wonky here. But that's why this could be really useful if you have like a Raven or some touch screen that's right up front on your desk and you can set these parameters. So maybe you have a screen that you have stuff on the top and the bottom or on the sides and you need to do some of the padding. You can do that here in TouchOSC so you don't have to make any changes on the screen itself. And that's same with some of the color, or if you are having a screen that you're flipping over. You can handle all of that stuff in your template so you don't have to do it with your screen. So here in Preferences, if we'll keep it at invert, that's fine. But I'm going to goose these up quite a bit. And you're going to see how we're changing these. And then let's change this to west. Hit play. And you can see, again, it's changed the direction. But also this padding here at the top and on the sides. That is what the padding is doing. It's changing it for your template on whatever screen when you're hitting play. Now you'll notice on my Apple device, that hasn't changed anything. Everything's exactly the same. So this is really just affecting if you were playing this from your computer. So I'm going to turn these things off. And let's take a look at one other thing, which is the back button. Now, if you were to set that double tap, go to play, you hit this, because let's say you had a button right here in the corner. You now have to double click it to back up. I don't like having it as a double tap. I think I need it nice and easy, nice and fast to get out of whatever editor or whatever live version I have. So I don't keep that on, but you can. Moving on, let's take a look at the log. Now in TouchOSC, we want to keep track of whatever our messages are. So let's add another button here, and we're going to make this one green. All right, so let's add messages. So this one, we'll just add a MIDI message. And we'll add one here. And then let's add an OSC message to our fader. And then we'll add a MIDI message here. So now if you go to View and then Toggle Log, which is also Shift, Control, and L all together, now you see this little area here that's going to show what your messages are. Now, if I was to touch these here, nothing's happening. If I use my iPad though, push my buttons, move the faders, you can see all of the data that's being sent. Also, if I was to go to play mode, move these, again, it's going to show inside this log. Now, this is super useful if you're trying to test out whether your data is sending correctly or not. But for me, I find that this is often in the way. So go up to Editor and then Preferences, Log View, and then, of course, you can have the timestamps, you can change the font and all that stuff. I like to keep this as a separate window because for me, it's just a little easier when I'm testing and using all of these devices to keep this window clear. I'm a big fan of clean setups with all of my navigation across 4+ screens plus an iPad, it's a little much, I know, but it's nice to have all of this space and all of these different items. Now, of course, that's maybe not what you have and definitely not what you need, but if you have 2 screens and you're working with your iPad device, and then you're also using a laptop that's got TouchOSC on it, maybe it's easier to not have it docked at the bottom. Who knows? It's up to you, and it's an option. All right, so back in preferences here, this is import. This has to do with the old version of TouchOSC, TouchOSC Mk1, and dealing with some of the layout files and global messages. You can dig into that, but if you're working with older versions, there's a lot of things you probably have to change. This is some of the options for that. Now let's take a look at MIDI. Now, virtual ports is going to have to do with if you are using some certain plugins that need to send and receive data that way. For the most part, I never use this, so I don't know that it's something that you're going to really need. Now, read note on and off messages. Let's take a look at that. Let's make a button. And we'll make this kind of pink, purple. And then let's go ahead and add a MIDI message. And this is going to be changed to note off. Now let's open the log. So we're looking at the log, and let's go ahead. I'm going to push this button. And you can see it's showing 127 and then 0. And this does correlate with what we have here. If I was to change this to 50, now you can see that's changed. However, if we were to change this so it's not reading that, if I push the button, it's just going to say 0. So that's what that's controlling. It's just going to show your top value or not. So now we have quite a few different MIDI messages and all sorts of things going on in our template. So how can we keep track of everything? If you go to View, Message Mapping, this is a great spot to keep everything organized. And another thing that's really important is to change these names. This is just called button 1, but we're going to call this red. We'll call this guy green. And maybe this is volume of a plume. And then we'll call this reverb. Of course, this isn't real, but if we wanted to keep track of things, I think this is a great way to do that. And of course, you can export this, and then it'll be an Excel spreadsheet. Something we'll take a look at in the future is how I keep track of all of the MIDI messages going across all these different programs, especially as they're coming from a MIDI keyboard, TouchOSC, I have a digital mixer back there, and some other instruments that are using MIDI information. So this is a great way that shows how your TouchOSC template is organized, especially if you're having to deal with multiple program channels. So we'll take a look at that more in a future video, but this is kind of the seed of that, keeping track of what's going on in your template. All right, let's go ahead and add a label. Right click here, label, beautiful. And recently we had the new font viewer. And this is an interesting thing that shows all these different characters you could use in TouchOSC for your template. Now, for instance, let's take kind of a flag here. Let's do that. If I click this, it doesn't seem like anything's happening. But then if I hit done, I already have this label selected. Let's go to text. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit paste. And now you can see that that's in there. Again, let's do another label. And then we'll go to the font viewer. And let's say I want to add this sign here. If I click it, it's copied. And then here, we'll select the text, paste, and then it puts it in. It's just copying it. It's just an easier way to find all of the different symbols and then paste them in. Now, if you go into Help and then Examples, there are a ton of pre-made examples for you to work with. One of the coolest ones, of course, is Pong. You can see here on my iPad, it just started playing immediately. And so here you go. This is one of the many you could work with. And then there's also, let's take a look at another one, the touch keys. And this is a ready-built keyboard just for you, moving up and down the octaves. So there's more to dig through with those, but take a look at them because there's a lot of stuff you can use in there and not have to build on your own, especially the big Logic Pad template. That is great for Logic, and you can also use it with other DAWs. All right, here in our beautiful template here, let's go ahead into our pager, and I want to add a button. And then, of course, if we double click here on the gray area, we exit that. Let's go into page 2. We're going to add a fader. And then we're going to go into 3, double click in there, and we're going to add a radio. So now as I go through these pages, all of those different objects are there. That's great. Now, what if I want to change a parameter of something inside the pager with a button out here? So we're going to take our green button here. We have a MIDI message. Let's go ahead and turn that MIDI message off. All right, let's get rid of it. So to do a local message, what we're going to do, you can hold Alt, click on your sending object, and then drag it over. Now, of course, if we do that, actually what we're doing is sending the information to the pager. So if what we were doing, let's say we were going to change the property color, and let's say we're changing the blues. Now, if I push this, as I push that green button, I'm actually impacting the entire pager, which is not what I want to be doing. I want to change, let's say, this fader in page 2. So the way you could do that, let's go ahead and get rid of this local message. What we can do here is add a local message, a new one, a fresh one, and we would be selecting with this eyedropper the thing in the pager. So that right now is fader 3. So we're going to click this, scroll up here, select fader 3, and now as we take a look, when I push it, right now it's moving up and down, as we can see. That's because the target is here. Let's change it to color greens. And now as I push it, you can see that it's changing only what's in page 2. Now, an important part of this is making sure your document tree is organized. If we had a lot of faders in here, it could get confusing to say which one is which. So that's why I recommend always using your name. So this is going to be, red fader. And this is going to be compression, because why not? So that just makes it a little bit easier when you're selecting for a local message within a pager which one you want to impact. And keeping these organized can also be important, because if we have, let's say, another button, and then we're going to add an OSC message to it. Now let's add the editor, or the toggle the log. All right, so we have an OSC message on this. Let's hit play, and then we're going to push this, and you can see what came out of this. And the address was /button6. And the reason for that is, as you've probably discovered in the past, /name, that's what's sending the string, and our name is button 6. So if we were to say this is volume, and then we were to hit it, it changes it to volume. Now you can use that for your OSC messages, but it could also be safer to just set it here, because sometimes when you copy and paste things, move them around, the name can change sometimes, especially if you're using button 1, button 2, button 3. So I like to not rely on name and instead just use the correct address. So I would actually delete that, select address here, set that to volume, and just like before, it's going to send it. But then I can change this to, this is volume for track 1, right? And that's easier to find in the document tree, but it's still going to send the correct message. Moving right along, some of the basics that I think people may not be aware of. Let's take our fader here, and we'll get rid of the log. This fader here, if you move it up and down, It's beautiful. If you need to get rid of the grid, of course, a lot of these are in the control. So you can uncheck the grid system. That's gone. Let's make this bigger to make sure you can see that. Let's say you don't want the cursor. So like if you were doing some sort of meter, this is really useful. Or you could have just the bar. And you can also, which is super nice for the cursor, if you want this to just be when it's active. So it's hidden unless you're touching it. So that means that the bar, you can make it something like that, which is nice and useful. Another thing you could do is make this lower its value on its own. Default pull. So let's click up here to 20. And now if I put this up, it's slowly going to move itself back down. And of course, as I increase this, it's going to go faster. Or you could have it go really slow, put it in 10. So these values, these controls, are specific to each object. So with our button here, it has its own button objects. Of course, you could change the shape if you want it to be a triangle, and you could change the orientation of it. Let's say we want it to be pointing east. That way it kind of looks like a play button. And you could turn it into a toggle. This is how we turn it into a toggle. And like I said, each object is going to have these specific controls for it that you'll have to set. Including you could hide the labels, like if you were just having these different color buttons that correlate throughout. It gives you a lot of flexibility here in TouchOSC, and it's important to keep track of whatever the object options are in addition to whatever you're dealing with in your messages. So also here in an encoder, if you wanted to change the grid just like in a fader, that's how you can do that. Now we have a lot going on here, and let's say that some of this you just want to keep but you're not going to use. Inactive or interactive is how you could stop this from being used. So you can see that I can't use this pager anymore. The objects inside are still functioning for me, but the pager itself, I can't push the buttons as it's in play mode. You could also then just hide this, so make it hidden, and then you don't have to deal with that. And I've showed this before with some pop-up messages. It could be a fun thing to do a local message, and then with your local message, you impact its visibility. So property, and then you'll show visibility. So now when I push this button, you can see it, otherwise I can't. If you're interested in local messages, I have a couple great videos that show other ways you can use local messages to show all sorts of different information with your objects. So these are really the basics of TouchOSC, and of course we've covered a lot, but there's even more if you're working with a higher level or more in-depth stuff. There's one other thing I want to show, which is a question that I received when somebody couldn't figure out what was happening with their object. So let's take a look at locked objects. Now you're coming through, and you have your button here, and you clicked in here and it locked it. And now all of a sudden you can't select it and you don't know why. To unlock it, you do it here in the tree, you click that. But the reason that happened is for some reason they have it so that it selects over this gray area. It's definitely annoying. I've definitely been trying to work on color and then accidentally locked something. So watch out for that. If that happens to you, that's probably the case, that you accidentally hit the lock button while you were picking the colors or picking visible. So just watch out for that. So hopefully this answers some of your basic questions about TouchOSC, and be sure to check out how you can pair TouchOSC with your DAW. I've got a lot of videos about pretty much all the DAWs out there. Of course, if there are more that I should check out, send me a message or comment below. I'll try and find a trial and set that up. TouchOSC has a lot that it can do, and that can be overwhelming, so take it step by step and just try some of these basic approaches for your workflow first. And then, of course, ask questions on the forum, in the comments below, and there's a lot of different people out there making a lot of cool stuff that can help you out. So hopefully you learned something today and you can like this video, and of course, subscribe to the channel as we take a look at a lot more stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.